Audit Committee for our fourth session with witnesses today into our inquiry into electronic waste and the circular economy. And we have panels today with leading industries involved in electronics and consumer products, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. For our first panel, I'd just like to ask each of the witnesses to say who they are, where they're from, and briefly what their role is in relation to sustainability within their business. So first of all, Andrew Mullen.
Yes, I'm Andrew Mullen. I'm head of product. Head of quality and sustainability for Beko PLC. We are a major white goods manufacturer, and I have responsibility for product durability, product reliability, and sustainability within the UK.
Thank you. And Kevin Considine.
Good afternoon, Chair. Yes, my name is Kevin Considine. I am Head of Sustainability for Samsung Electronics UK. My remit covers anything from the WEEE regulations, circular economy, all the way through to social sustainability issues, such as the Modern Slavery Report. I'm based here in the UK.
Thank you. And Eva Gouwens, who's joining us from Holland.
Yes, my name is Eva Gouwens. I am the CEO of Fairphone. And Fairphone is a social enterprise that designs and produces and sells smartphones. And our aim is to change the industry and show that it is possible to, and actually to motivate the industry, that it's possible to act more responsibly. And I'm going to tell you way more about it, I think, in the coming hour.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Well, you're very welcome. I'd like to ask a few questions to start with, looking at the sort of big picture of the environmental impact of your businesses, both in the way you generate product and the way in which you sell and seek to recycle products and their components. So if we could start with Andrew. Beko is, I believe, the largest home appliance supplier into the UK market. Could you tell us what you're doing to ensure that your business aligns with the Paris Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Yes, I can. Firstly, thank you for acknowledging we're the largest, but we have signed up to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. We have signed up to the UN 2030 sustainability goals, and I guess our focus really falls into three areas. It's about the materials we use, the way in which we produce product, and then how those products are used and are made energy efficient for the consumer. So in terms of, just to cover very briefly on all three, so we have a number of projects which look at using recycled materials in our products. That includes things like plastic bottles in washing cups. It includes fishing nets, which we now use for some of the plastics in our ovens and our dishwashers. It includes some bioplastics that we're working on for refrigeration, for launch at the end of this year, early next year. In terms of how we produce, we use renewable energy sources to run our factories. Our latest factory, which is in Romania, is a lighthouse factory. It's one of only 25 factories in the world recognized by the World Economic Forum as being an environmentally friendly factory. That solar farms that power it. And then we focus very much on driving down water consumption, making sure that anything that comes out of the factory is clean. And then of new products, we focus on energy efficiency, making sure that the products are durable, reliable, and nearly all of our products are well into 90% in terms of recyclability at the end of life.
Thank you. And Kevin, Samsung is the largest manufacturer of consumer electronics in the world now, and I think is the largest manufacturer of units of phones in the world. Could you answer the question as well on behalf of Samsung?
Certainly. I mean, similar to what Andrew has just said, we support the Paris Agreement. We fully support the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We have two targets at a corporate level for a business, one on our operations and one related to our product. And those are goals that have been established and actually will expire this year. Just so that you know, as a manufacturer, we produce 90% of the products ourselves. So we have 37 factories around the world. So unlike some of our competitors, we also are a direct manufacturer, and we produce products as well and components on behalf of some of our competitors. But yes, we are underpinned by two climate change targets, one for operations, one for product. We made a commitment last year to source renewable energy for all our operations in the US, China, and in Europe. We've been a member of I think we were the first Korean company to join the Carbon Disclosure Project. We've also joined the Carbon Disclosure Supplier Program, and we are working with 80% of our supply chain to understand their emissions and also try to move them towards a renewable energy solutions. In the UK, we've got a good relationship with the Carbon Trust, for example. So we've been footprinting our flagship mobile devices and our Note devices since 2012. Earlier this year, we also footprinted a flagship semiconductor. So once again, we've been monitoring the footprint of our devices and looking at how we can identify improvements in how we design those products. Just on the United Nations Development Programme, as I said, our sustainability report reflects the goals that are most material to us as a business and outlines what action we are taking to address those goals. We've partnered with the United Nations Development Programme to launch an app about the Sustainable Development Goals, and that is promoting understanding and awareness to our users. That app was embedded on our product last year, our S10 product last year, and it is a donations-based app. So consumers can take direct action to support those apps which are most relevant to them. Just very quickly on the UK, I just wanted to mention that we also take action in the UK with regards to renewable energy, but also we partner with organisations. So, for example, Bulb, the energy provider, renewable energy provider in the UK, we've been working with them to develop a Smart Things app, which gives consumers much more control and understanding about energy in the home and how they're using that energy. And I think people know us for TVs and mobile phones, but we produce a whole range of products, including, for example, air source heat pumps, which is an important renewable technology for the UK if we are going to decarbonise homes. I'll stop there. There's a lot we're doing around packaging as well, but I think that should give you a flavour of some of the activities we're doing.
I think we'll come on to that, but I think a long way to go. You said you've just committed to renewable energy last year, but in 2016, only 1% of your energy source from renewable sources, energy used. And I didn't hear you mention South Korea in your list of countries where you made that pledge. And as South Korea is where your main so I understand it is where most of your manufacturing is centered. Isn't that a rather glaring omission?
No, not at all. You're right. We have challenges, I think, in South Korea. Renewable energy development infrastructure in South Korea is not where it possibly is in European countries. We are lobbying hard to ensure that we increase the volume of renewable energy available in Korea. So it's just not possible for us to purchase renewable energy, I believe, in Korea. I think there are some very ambitious targets being proposed in South Korea for the development and deployment of renewable energy. So I think we will see change, and change will be coming very soon, I think, in that country.
Thank you. And Eva, Fairphone's obviously a very different kind of company, and you're more focused on these issues than the larger companies that you're sharing the panel with. Could you just tell us a bit about Fairphone's approach?
Yes, thanks. Indeed, you can't mention us the largest yet, but as you can do with the former two companies. To elaborate a bit on Fairphone, we are a social enterprise, and we are building a market for ethical phones. And we do that to motivate the industry to act more responsibly. And by designing and producing and selling smartphones, we actually uncover all kinds of issues in the supply chain behind our product. And what we try to do is that we raise awareness around those malpractices, that we innovate on solutions, and that we actually do that jointly. So it's not, we try to partner up and convene all kinds of parties together to implement those solutions in the supply chain. Because our ultimate goal is to make care for people and planet a natural part of doing business. And I can explain that the Paris Agreement or the SDGs, actually, they are in the core of our company on many aspects. And what we focus on, I think what I maybe can add versus the former two companies that you heard, is that we focus on long-lasting products. So products that you can keep in use for a long time, because we know in smartphones, 70% of the CO2 emission actually takes place around production. And the tool that we use in our company is modularity. So our smartphone is actually built up in 6 modules, and that allows us to be resource efficient, to save all kinds of emissions, because we improve both the repairability of our phones, the recyclability, but also the upgradability of the phone during its lifetime. And by that, it's not just making the phone. You really need to set up we call it an ecosystem that allows a consumer to indeed repair their phone. Because I have it here, I can easily open the phone, and for example, if your battery runs out of energy quite quickly, which is an important reason for many consumers to change their phone and really buy a new device. With Fairphone, you just take out the battery, you buy a new battery in the web shop, and you replace it yourself at home. And then you save a whole new device, because actually the rest of the materials in the phone are still perfectly well fitted for the job. And we work together with the Fraunhofer Institute to get a bit of a better understanding of the implications of both the modularity and our design decisions. And what you see is if you can expand the lifetime of a phone towards, for example, 5 years, you would save actually 30% of the CO2 emissions. And if you can extend it to 7 years, for example, it would even be 45%. So the production and the focus on preventing production of more devices, that is really the key, because the usage and, for example, the transportation are way less impactful for the environment.
Thank you. I'm just going to stick with you for a moment, if I may. So one of the other features, as I understand it, of your system is to try to minimize the content of conflict zone minerals. So tungsten, tantalum, and tin and gold, I think in particular, and perhaps cobalt in batteries. Why is that important to you, and how successful have you been in reducing the content of such minerals in your phones?
Thanks for asking the question. Before I focused a lot on the planet and on carbon emissions. Actually, indeed, this is very important for us as well, because it's 100% circular economy. It's just impossible, at least in the coming decades. We won't be there, I fear. So it always will be a mix of both virgin materials and recycled materials, and both change need to be investigated and actioned. And the recycling part, that is the nice part to talk about, because it's cleaner and it is way more positive, and it's not so dirty as the virgin mining, but there are quite some malpractices in the virgin mining as well. Child labor, hazardous working conditions for both people, but also for the environment. And Fairphone has focused actually from the start also on the virgin mining, and we started up with conflict minerals. And what we try to do, our ambition is that we source minerals for our phone that are responsibly sourced, which means traceable and supports the better working conditions for the mine workers or the factory workers or the broader communities. And what we did, because there are more than 42 minerals in a phone, what we did is we did a scoping study. And we chose the 8 minerals where actually we as an industry and where the issues actually are the most severe and where we as an electronics industry have a big leverage and a big impact. And indeed, those are, you already mentioned a few, I won't mention them all, but that is very important for us also to work on an ethical phone. And for example, we work in Uganda on the gold project. And we don't do that alone again. We really believe in partnering, because if a small company like Fairphone wants to do it alone, it takes way longer. You really need to partner up. And there we focus specifically on improving the conditions for small scale mines towards a standard such as fair trade. And we aim actually, this is specifically aimed around stopping child labor in those mines and in this environment. We implement also better working conditions. And what Fairphone does then is that we provide the demand in the first phase of when those mines actually are improving the conditions, they can supply to us. And that's also why it's so important that we partner up, that there from the start is already demand for those more responsibly sourced minerals. Same for the Fair Cobalt Coalition. We need cobalt to make this transition towards green energy. All the solar panels, windmills, they all need batteries, so they all need cobalt. And there's quite a lot going on in that industry. And we have now set up a coalition to also support, again, artisanal mining and local initiatives to improve that.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions on this in a minute, but just for me to finish, Kevin, I have not, I'm ashamed, oh, not ashamed to say, I've not used a Samsung phone, so I don't know how easy it is to extract a battery from one of your phones, but I do know how it's very difficult to take it out of one of your competitors' phones, unlike the Fairphone we've just heard from. Why don't you allow for replaceable batteries in your phone? If you don't, and do you address the same issue about how you respect conflict mineral? Kevin, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I apologise. I think on the issue of conflict minerals, we are doing very similar work to Fairphone. So we comply with the OECD guidance on responsible supply chains for conflict minerals and also areas of high risk. We have a supplier code of conduct in place. We are a member of the Responsible Business Alliance and part of their Responsible Minerals Initiative, which has a program in place looking at smelters and making sure that they are accredited so that we understand and have assurance that we are sourcing minerals responsibly. And so there's a lot of work that goes on in there. Eva also mentioned about partnerships. We see the value of partnerships, of course, as well. We are a member of the European Partnerships for Responsible Minerals. That's a multi-stakeholder forum with European governments as well as industry and academics, looking at funding projects in conflict areas and areas of high risk to improve standards around mining and sustainable solutions for local communities. Similarly, we have supported, or we've worked with the German Development Agency, GIZ, with our sister companies, Samsung SDI, which is our battery manufacturer, BASF, and also BMW Group to develop Cobalt for Development, which is looking and working with an artisanal mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo to once again develop sustainable mining solutions. So I think we consider ourselves to be a very ethical company and working in a very ethical way. Just to come back to your issue on phones, and the circular economy always gets down to an issue around phones very quickly, and I'm hoping we can talk about other products as well. But phones, the reason that phones went to a sealed unit was about a durability issue. If you looked at the repair network, lots of the repairs were around water and dust ingress. By sealing a unit means that you don't no longer have those repairs. Fundamentally, we're responding to a consumer demand. The innovation that has gone into our devices means that we are producing slim devices, much more resource efficient. And what I hope will come out of this discussion today is that when we talk about the circular economy, when we talk about repairability, durability, reusability, there is always trade-offs in design. And so, I mean, we moved away from removable batteries because we were responding to consumer demand. And I would say that we are actively innovating in this area, and we invest a lot of money in it in research and development. We are constantly improving our technology, and we are leading the world in innovation and technology design in and around these products.
Thank you. We're going to come on to durability in a moment with Barry Shearman, but just to give Andrew an opportunity. I mean, do your products also contain minerals from conflict areas?
Certainly small amounts of minerals, and much like the other two. We have programs in place to make sure that we know where those minerals have come from. We are audited to SA 8000, which demonstrates fair treatment of workers. We risk assess all our suppliers, and we audit those for whom we feel the risk is highest to make sure as much as is practically possible, we do keep those conflict minerals out of our products.
Thank you. To be Gardner. Barry, can you hear me?
Chair, yes, I thought you were going to bring in Barry Shearman, you said.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Barry. I don't know where that thought came from.
By 20 years.
No, our committee doesn't go on for long enough to be able to allow Barry Shearman to join us as well. Barry Gardner, I'm so sorry.
Thanks. Look, good afternoon to our panel. And can I ask any of you, do you know anything about the Livermore Pleasanton Fire Department in California?
No.
No? Okay. It has a light bulb that was installed and switched on in 1901. And it's still going strong today in 2020. It is reputed to be the world's longest lasting light bulb at 119 years. Now, I'm sure all of us would be very happy to buy such a light bulb, but very few of us would want to sell it, would we? And Kevin, your company, Samsung, was recently fined 5 million euros for making sure that your smartphones don't last anywhere near as long as that light bulb. In fact, you were intentionally slowing them down, weren't you? How long had you been doing that? And what steps have you now taken to adopt a fairer and more sustainable business model?
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, that is a single case brought against Samsung in Italy. It is a case that we have contested and is going through an appeals process. Our response to that was very clear. We provide software updates to enhance the consumer experience. It's not to affect performance. So that is very much an isolated case and very much what, as I say, is being contested. Look at all the products that we place on the market. The durability, as I've said, is a core component for how we develop products. In fact, in our sustainability report, we have 5 circular economy principles, and durability is 2 of those. So we've done a lot with regards to how we test products. We test to international standards as well as developing our own standards. And we rigorously test products. We are working in a European market that is very, very...
Lost you.
Sorry, I think it just keeps muting. We are in a very competitive market. and we're all fighting for market share. And so actually providing products that meet consumer demand and durability is a key factor in that is very, very important. I think we performed very well in which surveys. There was a report recently, back in actually 2017 by RAP on Switched On to Value, looking at what products are coming into the waste stream. And they found that products were lasting a lot longer than consumers' expectations. And actually, if you broke down which products were lasting longer, it was those from original equipment manufacturers and not own brand manufacturers. So I think there's a lot that we are doing around durability. And I think the whole issue of planned obsolescence, as it's called, there's a lack of evidence that supports that completely. In fact, I know in France there's the planned obsolescence law, and I'm aware of only one other fine in that country. I mean, in Germany they've done a lot of studies.
Look, I don't want to give the impression that Samsung's the only bad guy when it comes to planned obsolescence. Apple was fined by the French regulators 25 million euros for the same trick of slowing down phones. Only in the French courts, I think it was actually called fraud, wasn't it? It wasn't called planned obsolescence. It was actually called fraud. We all understand that there's an inherent contradiction between product durability and company profitability. So perhaps I could ask Eva, how do you think that should be balanced out? How does the planned obsolescence of software and components impact companies like Fairphone?
Now to be honest, I also struggle a bit with the term of planned obsolescence, because it implicates some sort of evil mind that somewhere decides that now this phone is obsolete. And it's also a bit the free market. So it's more complex than just one company deciding this phone is now obsolete. It is a very complex system of all the business models of all those different players. And you asked, how does this influence Fairphone? Now, if I talk about software, yes, we struggle with obsolescence. So it is present. It's not that I ignore it, but it's tough to address it in a way like, oh, this is the evil mind behind planned obsolescence. Or actually, if we would talk about the opposite, so a long-lasting phone, what would you then need if you would state it positively? And in our case, for example, we have an Android-based phone, so we need Google, and they provide us with updates, and we need them, and the security patches, and we need them to that's the first step. They need to decide which Android version is supported for how long. But then we also rely on the chipset manufacturers. So the chipset we use in our phone, we, for example, work with Qualcomm, but they need to program their chipset in such a way that they are, how do you say that? They are able to work with this specific Android release. And they need also to make sure that their chipsets actually can integrate all those software upgrades. And only when that work is done, a company as Fairphone actually can start with now doing our part of the upgrades and integrating the updates towards our specific hardware. So you already see that these are big companies with all their own business models and their own product portfolios, and they need to work together. And then this is just Fairphone. Yeah, you have how many smartphone providers and how many products in every portfolio. So it is possible, but it is a very complex system, and that altogether drives the obsolescence of a phone. What we did, and actually not, this is about software, but also about hardware. It's more similar. For example, camera, you want a new camera, but the camera manufacturer stops producing the specific camera that we have in our phone, and therefore, we can't provide spare parts anymore, or the phone becomes obsolete. So altogether, it's a super complex system of all kinds of manufacturers that have their own product portfolio and their own business models. And the market drives them towards innovation, and a new phone every year. So, or every 2 years. it is able to work around it. Luckily, with the Fairphone 2, our second generation phone, we already so far were able to provide software support and updates for 4.5 years. And now we definitely will hit the mark of 6 years in the end, but we have done that with external independent software developers and all kinds of partners, our community. You really now need to work around the industry. And we could set up, now we're going to talk about that, I think also later, some sort of setup and regulation should aim for longer support and longer availability of spare parts.
Thank you. The research by Eunomia that was published in January of this year showed that, and I think I'll quote them to get it exactly right, a lack of minimum eco-design standards. I noticed you talked about modularity being intrinsic in your own design, but to go back to the quote, a lack of minimum eco-design standards and consumer information to guide choice relating to product quality and repairability. And they say that's seen a shortening of product life and a high cost of repair relative to purchasing a new product. This can perversely encourage the purchasing of new products, even when the product is repairable. Now, in a sense, your business model shows that. But this is every director of finance's fantasy, isn't it? Even when it can be economically repaired, lack of consumer information means the punter just goes out and buys a new one. But lifespan labeling could change that, and it's been shown to also boost sales. So if I can turn to Mr. Mullen, how open would your company be to a durability accreditation system like the one used in Austria? Because I noticed the small print on, you picked up the chair saying quite rightly that you're #1 in the UK. I think it's for large home appliances sector.
Yeah.
But your small print there says, we remain committed to developing products and partnerships that tackle the challenges facing our planet today to leave a better world for future generations. So durability accreditation systems, are they part of that?
Before I come on to that, perhaps I could go back to your light bulb example.
Sure.
And to use one of our own products, if you were to buy a standard 2-door fridge freezer in 1995, that product today's electricity prices probably would have cost you £128 a year to run.
Absolutely.
Product in 2015 is £28 a year to run.
Modern upgrades and innovation means that things can be environmentally better as a result, and nobody doubts that. But you've seen the statistics as well as we all have that talk about 35% and indeed up to 45% of the rollover, if you like, being not because of increased efficiency and actually mitigating against it. So, but I do take your point. It's a point well made and fairly made.
Okay, so to pick up on your point on durability, and I think specifically you mentioned about repair cost, our products are repairable and our products are reliable. We talk to, in an average year, about 600,000 of our customers who contact us in some way. And there's one thing about customers: if they're unhappy with the durability or the reliability or the performance of our products, they tell us.
They'll do that if they know how you compare with somebody else, and surely that's the whole point of having such information available to the customer. The point of the research that I quoted was that the customer isn't aware, and there isn't an accreditation system that is comparing products like for like. So that's why I'm saying to you, would you welcome such a system so that they could compare your products against other manufacturers?
I think we would welcome any system that enables a customer to make a reasoned and informed choice when they purchase an appliance. I think the point I would make, to go back to the fridge freezer, is there is more than just the durability. There is the energy efficiency. There is the safety of that appliance. Again, to use the 1995 fridge example, that fridge almost certainly wouldn't have had a flame retardant back on it. So there are many, many considerations, of which durability is absolutely one. If I might come back to your point about the cost of repair, one of the significant factors today in terms of the cost of a repair is the cost of the engineer relative to the product. So if you were to take a product that was manufactured in 2000, an engineer would be about 14% of that product cost to repair it. Now it's over 30%. So that's another significant factor. And I think all these things have to be taken into consideration when the consumer is presented with information.
Is that not where Eva's point about modularity actually comes in? Because if the component parts of any appliance were made in a more modular fashion, designed in that way in the first place, then the repair costs would be a lot less. But because they're not plug and play, actually repair costs are boosted.
Again, I think there's a trade-off, and to use an example from back in the past, when I was a boy growing up, we had a TV that was rented, and those TVs were modular design. They were designed so that when a repairman came out, and they came out frequently, they could take out the panel that was faulty, they could replace it with a refurbished one, and they could get the set going again. It became very apparent that one of the big problems with those TV sets was actually the interconnections between the various panels. The very fact that it was modular led to some of its weaknesses. And I think for all of us as manufacturers, there is a trade-off between making a product that is modular and easily repairable. And we repair products just like, as a manufacturer. And so ease of repair is important to us. But we have to trade that off against whether or not that modularity actually starts to impact on durability.
Well, Mr. Malcolm, you've raised a very interesting question, which the committee, I think, has partially explored previously, and that's looking at changing the model from a purchase model, an ownership model, to a service model, so that you pay for the service rather than for the item itself, the fridge or the cooker or whatever.
Yeah.
And of course, it would then be in the service provider's interest to make sure that there was that ease of repair. But I wanted perhaps to give Eva Gowans the opportunity to come back on what you'd said about modularity and the problems with connectivity from modularity, because of course she's pointed out that Fairphone actually have a modular structure, so I didn't want you to have yours calumniated by default.
Actually, he's right. Modularity isn't the holy grail. It is the tool that we use and that we think for smartphones is very fit for purpose. And I'm not going to shy away that we had our issues with the stability of the phone. Luckily, we're now selling our third generation phone, so we solved those issues, and we now have a very stable phone. It's not easy, but for me, the main point is that already in the product design, you should make decisions based on, I want actually to design a product that is long-lasting, easy to repair, and after its use also easy to recycle again. So that is what we try to do, the whole system of circularity, not only focus on recyclability, but actually higher in the pyramid on keeping the materials longer at its value, and also the upgradability or the repairability. But I agree, modularity is not the holy grail, and every choice you make has pros and cons. But it is important at the beginning, and it's also every electronics segment and category has its own dynamics. But it is about making more sustainable choices already in the product design.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Barry. And over to Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Chairman. May I start, if I may, with a question to Andrew Mullen. By the way, these questions all relate to producers' position, if you like, on the right to repair. So to what extent do you believe there is a trade-off between designing products for durability and ensuring that they are more readily repaired?
I think, as I said before, I think there is, a dynamic and a conflict between both. We want a product to be durable. We want it to be repaired. As I said, we repair a significant number of products every year ourselves as a result of those products being covered by warranty. And that might be it's not necessarily a 1-year warranty. That might be a much longer warranty. We also do repairs out of warranty. So, it's not in our interest to make products difficult to repair. At the same time, we do want products that last a long. And I think one of the things to bear in mind with that is, in terms of a repair, the amount of time that an engineer might spend repairing a small or a cheaper part offset against the cost of repairing of changing potentially a more expensive part, but the engineer spending less time on it, and quite often that can be a cheaper option. I think in terms of right to repair and consumers repairing their own products or repair workshops, I think that clearly there is a place for those. But I think as a manufacturer, it's absolutely right that we are concerned that people who are doing that are able to do so safely and not put themselves at risk, or indeed other people at risk. And we recognize that some of those appliances that we make can, if repaired incorrectly, present a risk. So it's a fine balance, and it's something that we keep under review.
If I may, I'd like to just follow that question up with another, if I may, to you, Andrew. So you've mentioned safety concerns around the repair of white goods. Do you think the repair market for these products is adequately regulated at the moment?
I don't believe there's any regulation of the repair market for white goods. There is in gas appliances, obviously, and anybody who repairs a gas product must be accredited by GasSafe in the UK. That doesn't mean that spare parts for gas appliances aren't freely available on the open market for anybody who wants to give it a go. Similarly, if you take a product like a microwave ovens can be lethal if you take the top of it and you haven't plugged it in and you touch the wrong part. And as I said, when customers phone us and they're looking for some help, whilst we don't wish to be obstructive, and I've spent time on a technical helpline helping people repair products, you do really have to make a judgment as to whether or not they are competent to do it. And I think anything that's brought in terms of giving consumers assurance that somebody who is repairing their products is able to do so would be very, very welcome.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Millen. Questions for all, actually, now, and perhaps if I could start with Ms. Eva Gouwens. The right to repair campaigners say that there are 3 pillars to support: product design, access to spare parts, and access to manuals. Could you perhaps talk us through what your company's approach is on each of these issues and outline concerns you may have?
I won't repeat myself too much on the product design. I think I already touched upon the modularity there. What's quite crucial for us is the availability of spare parts. And that's also a bit related to the questions formerly asked about the obsolescence of those parts, because it's actually quite a challenge. It's not as simple as just ordering a few additional parts, because you need to have good forecasting, and the life cycles and the production cycles of those components are often quite short, due to those industry dynamics. So the availability of spare parts, it's really tough, and we've struggled with that also in the past, specifically when we started. But we also more or less needed to educate a bit our own manufacturer on why we wanted to do this, and convince them to supply longer warranty, longer availability of parts, and also improve the quality control in their processes to make sure that for a longer period actually the phone remained in use. And specifically when it is about spare parts, I think there a minimum amount of time that you should have those spare parts available could have a trickle-down effect also towards the manufacturers and the suppliers. A bit like, for example, the legislation around the toxic chemicals more or less had the same effect. If the whole industry needs to have spare parts available for so long, that in the end will have an effect, I think, also deeper down in the supply chain, and influencing on how they also produce those spare parts or design them and keep on producing them. And some actually worry that this would hamper the innovation, but I think actually we need more innovation like this in our industry. So innovation on how can we actually provide spare parts for a longer period in time? How can we produce phones that last longer? Because the innovation that you see right now, where the industry is actually quite proud of, quite often doesn't really change the way you use your device. So I think longer support for the products, both in spare parts and in the design, and then indeed the manuals follow. I think that would really, that's really needed for our industry.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps, Kevin, if I may, come to you now. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you. I think when we talk about repair, I think as Andrew mentioned, I think people don't understand the level of repair that manufacturers such as ourselves.
Sorry, we have lost you, Kevin. It seems to go automatically into mute sometimes.
Yes, apologies. Okay, we'll try again. Yes, I mentioned the issue of repair and the fact that I don't think people understand the extent of the repair network we have. As Andrew mentioned, we fix products under repair, both in and out of warranty products. We're able to pick up a device and get it back to you within 5 days, anywhere in the country. We have 100% coverage. We have mobile vans out and about all over the country, covering about 94% of the country, and we're able to pick up a phone and repair it and get it back to you within an hour. Similarly, we have operations on high streets where you can have a similar service. So there's an awful lot that goes on in repair. The one thing I would say, I think about repair, there's a lot of concern about the right to repair. I think we've got mechanisms in place at a European level within certain policies already addressing this, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. The Waste Framework Directive talks about right to repair and sets criteria, established criteria around safety, security, and intellectual property rights that should be met to enable right to repair. We've got the material efficiency standards that have horizontal standards that have been developed now at a European level that looks at repairability, reusability, recyclability. And those are standards now that I think will inform future policy discussions and also set a precedent for product design measures. So I think the mechanisms are in place to address this, and I don't think we should lose sight of that.
Okay, but no particular concerns as such?
Well, there are particular concerns around product liability, for example. If we have to start advocating or supporting independent third-party repair, where does liability lie for a repair that is there is a fault in that repair? Who is liable for that? I think there are genuine concerns around safety. It's probably not my area of expertise, so I won't touch on that per se. But I know Andrew's picked up on some of those issues. So there's genuine concerns around that. Who has control of that of that repair?
Thank you very much. Robert, I don't know if you're with us. Robert Curiel? Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't know if you were able to follow everything that has just been said, but do you have any thoughts?
Mr. Longy, appreciate the opportunity. Can you just really quickly repeat the question that you had? I just want to make sure I'm addressing the core issue you'd like for us to address.
Okay, it's around right to repair and basically the three pillars around that, product design, and I know we've already said quite a bit about that already, but then access to spare parts and access to manuals, and just wondering what your company approach is to all of these, and if you've got any specific concerns around them.
I'm sorry to butt in, but Robert's really meant to be in the second panel, Marco. So I think if you could just provide a quick answer, Robert, and then we'll come back to you in the next panel.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Longi, just very quickly, we do provide support for our devices that are up to 5 years old. And we do also have numerous programs around refurbishment and making sure that products stay out of the landfill. But I'll be happy to provide more details during our panel session.
Okay. And I apologize if I ask you a question that was meant for someone else.
It's quite all right. Thank you.
Mr. Mullen, if I could come back to you then, and hopefully you are the right person I should be asking.
Yes. So I think I covered a lot of what I was going to say before. I think one point that has been mentioned by both the other two panelists, and I think it's an important point, is the issue of spare parts. Because we hold spare parts in the UK, as most of our competitors, as Samsung will do, because if your product goes wrong, you're not going to wait for us to bring a spare part over from Turkey, where our factories are, or from anywhere else in the world. But what that means is we do have a huge redundancy in spare parts, because we have to have those parts available should they be required. Now, those parts aren't covered by the WEEE directive, and actually we talked before about sustainability and reusing materials, and we are in danger of, the longer we go on keeping spare parts to support long life of products, building a bigger and bigger mountain of spare parts that aren't covered by the WEEE directive and that we have to dispose of at some point.
Okay, thank you. And if I could stick with
Mr. Longi, can I just come in there to add a point, please?
Sure.
If we are promoting repair, I think an important part of repair we must remember is that actually recovering parts, faulty parts, allows us to refurbish those parts to a factory standard and reuse them back again in our supply chain. If we open up repair to independent third parties, there's no guarantee that we get those parts back. So if we want to drive a circular economy, we need to try to get those parts back. And so that would drive a truly circular system. The other thing I would say is that professional repair keeps the value of the product higher. And if we truly want to see a circular economy, we need to ensure that the inherent value of that product remains as high as it can through its lifetime. And I believe that is only achieved through professional repair. I understand that there's pressures around this to open up repair, but I don't think we should lose sight of that within this circular economy debate.
Okay, can I thank you all for your answers?
Thank you, Marco. And now some questions from Matthew Offord. Could you unmute, Matthew?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to hear about recycling of your products. I have a Mark II Land Rover that was manufactured actually in the year of my birth. And what astounds me is that when I've taken it apart, not only is it disassembled very easily, but I'm able to not only recycle those parts I take out, but also to buy new ones. So I wanted to ask a question to yourselves about the same way. How easy are your products to disassemble, and are they recyclable very easily in our current recycling regime? Who would like to go first?
I'll take that first. If you. So in terms of recyclability, end of life, all our products are, with the exception of dishwashers, actually are 95% plus recyclable through the current UK recycling system. The reason dishwashers are different is because to meet energy legislation, we have to put insulation in them, and that insulation is not recyclable. But other than that, they're all completely recyclable. The packaging is also completely recyclable. In terms of taking them apart, I think that to a certain extent actually goes back to the previous discussion, because if you're a manufacturer, trained engineer, you can take that product apart very easily to fix it. If you're not, then you might have some problems doing it. But for an experienced engineer who's been trained by the manufacturer, we get very, very few reports of engineers having problems taking it apart. And actually, when we do, as I've mentioned previously, we repair products, so it's not in our interest to have them as difficult to take apart.
But before you go on, or anyone else answers, you say it's recyclable. I believe even objects such as Tetra Pak is recyclable, but very little of it is, because it's not always possible for local authorities. So when you say it is recyclable, how do you mean? How easy is it for local authorities and others to actually take apart your products and then to use those products for additional materials or other resources?
Well, any product at the moment that we make is covered by the WEEE regulation, so it has to go to an authorised treatment facility, and that generally falls into one of two categories. It will either go to a fridge reprocessing plant, or it will go into a large household appliance reprocessing plant. Now, a lot of those in the current UK system tend to be car plants, so they will go through a shredder. But allows the component materials to be recovered, and then they can be used for other things. So the steel can be set aside and go off be made into new things. Plastics are more of a problem because certain older products had chemicals in there which we now know shouldn't go into new appliances. But in terms of the newer products, it's the raw materials are very easily recovered.
Okay. Ms. Goins, particularly mobile telephones.
Yeah, what you started off with, how easy is it to repair them and to buy a spare part? In our case, that is quite easily because of the product design. But if you now, the question now moves a bit more towards the recyclability of the phone, so really at its end of life. And there actually for smartphones, so I think actually every category has its own dynamics, but for smartphones, one of the big issues is actually the collection of the phones. So most of the phones remain in the drawers of many of the users and don't actually come back to a point where they can be professionally recycled. And we did do a research, so for our Fairphone 2, a third party checked about the recyclability of a modular phone like our Fairphone 2 actually was bigger. And yes, it was easier to recycle because you can dismantle it already to a lower level at the start. But still, at the best case, it's what 1/3 of the materials that actually was recovered as an original material again. So it's quite low, and therefore the limitations of the current recycling industry of smartphones actually again emphasize that the long-lasting phone, that is actually the way to make the usage of the materials most efficient and the most circular. So that is actually what I would like to say on this topic regarding our products.
Thank you, Mr. Considine.
Thank you. Yes, we make, as Andrew said, we make the products repairable, and so therefore they're easy to disassemble. I think there's a bigger issue there, though, if you don't mind. When you look at how WEEE is collected in the UK, much of the small domestic appliances, all the way through to power tools, toys, ICT equipment, that is all lumped in together. The standard of treatment that we have in the UK, that's best available technique, dates back to 2011. So, and there's great disparity between the level of recycling that we see in the UK. We see some great examples of innovation in recycling, but I think there's lots of evidence of rather outdated recycling methods. So I don't think we're maximising value from the WEEE that we're collecting. So even if you provide products easy for disassembly, ultimately, as Andrew has said, they're going through a shredder. So much of that is actually wasted. We've done some work in Samsung promoting labelling on the backs of TVs to aid disassembly. So We have a cadmium label. This is something that we've led, but it's part of a wider TV producer community, and also a mercury label on the back of TV, so that recyclers can identify what's in the product or not and treat accordingly. I would also point out that at a European level, there is the I4R platform, which is the trade associations for white goods and also for digital technologies working together to develop product fiches to support recyclers on how to take apart products. So that information exists, and that information is available to recyclers, academics, etc. So a lot of work has been done by producers to support disassembly. I come back to my original point though. We can provide all this information, but if the technology and the standards are not there and drive improvement, then we're wasting our time.
That's great, thank you. Mr. Mullin did make a point about chemicals within some of the products. And so I wanted to ask, how are the three of you, how are your organizations actually removing some of those toxic chemicals from the products that you currently manufacture?
I'm happy to take this one first. I think in the Eunomia report that was mentioned earlier, Samsung was put forward as an example of best practice in regards to our chemicals policy. So we have a 4-stage approach, and one of those stages is a voluntary phase out of chemicals. So beryllium, PVC, for example, those are all, and a number of phthalates, they have already been sort of voluntarily taken out of our products. I've mentioned the mercury label and the cadmium label. So I think we're doing a lot around that. Once again, I would still come back to legislation, and we have some really effective policies at a European level that I think the UK still needs to follow. REACH being one of them, of course. There's a lot of evidence been and work been done through REACH to get a greater understanding about how chemicals in a substance, but also in a preparation, impact human health and the environment. A lot of work's been done there about restriction and control of substances. And then, of course, RoHS. RoHS is a very important piece of legislation for our industry. And I think it's testament to that piece of legislation that you see over 40 similar pieces of legislation to RoHS around the world. So I think they provide the important platform for our chemicals legislation and leading the way in understanding and identifying chemicals that are most at risk to us and also to our consumers.
Okay. Any other contributions?
Yeah, I'd actually support what Kevin says, which is RoHS and REACH as legislation has actually dealt with the vast majority of these chemicals. The rest of them, actually, I think in most cases, we don't need production anymore. To a certain extent, it is an old historic problem that has now been addressed.
But does that specify specific chemicals?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
So, for example, in the case of bromide flame retardants, which everyone is now withdrawing and removing, but they're not withdrawing chlorinated flame retardants, for example. So they're the same family of chemicals, but they're only removing specific ones. And so what is your policy and what is your direction of actually removing those family of toxic chemicals rather than the specific products?
Kevin's probably more of an...
Yeah, this is not my, this topic is not my, to be honest. So I will refrain from answering. If I'm happy to write later to the committee about it, but this is not my expertise.
Okay.
I think that's what they call a hospital pass, isn't it? Look, I think, as I've said, I think we have the mechanisms in place. So the evidence base is there. And I think the great thing about the UK is that, and in our contributions to European policy is that we advocate an evidence-based policy. So yes, there is substitution within the REACH regulations, and we may be replacing within one family for another, but that is considered a suitable substitute. If it's not, it could go on the restrictions list. There could be a sunset date set for it. So I think we are moving towards the phase out of these chemicals, but it has to be within the context of sustainability. So it's the evaluation based against economic, social, and environmental benefits.
Okay, oh, sorry, Mr. Mullin.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I agree with that. I think it has to be within a regulatory framework, and that is already extensive. And if it can be improved, then, obviously we will follow that. Okay,
great. Just one final question, which Mr. Constantine has already alluded to. the Royal Society of Chemistry has advocated product labels or a product database, which Mr. Considine says has already been introduced. And this would outline the chemicals which are in products and how easy they are, not only to disassemble, but also to recycle. Is that something that that particularly Ms. Goerens and Mr. Mullin, you would support?
Yes, I think we are already working on an EU project, part of which involves us marking components with a QR code that effectively a passport with exactly what materials are in that component. And yes, anything that aids recycling. One of the things I haven't mentioned previously, but perhaps now is an appropriate time to mention, is that we are actually also a WEEE recycler. We have 2 recycling plants in Turkey in 2 of our factories, and therefore we have an interest in making sure that we can, when we do recycle these products, can reclaim as much useful material out of them as we can. So yes, anything that improves recycling, we would support.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Considine.
Sorry, I think when it comes to labelling, it's we need to remember that the energy label in the UK hasn't really resonated with the consumer. It's not a major driver for sales. So when we talk about a label, I get a little bit nervous about, you hear a lot of conversation about consumers want more information and everybody thinks a label is great. And actually, I think there's evidence to suggest that a label hasn't necessarily worked for energy efficiency. And actually, what messages are you trying to get across? So I would err on the side of caution there slightly. Happy to work towards supporting any type of project, but I do think that the report you mentioned didn't really look at what was already going on in Europe, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. The material efficiency standards that we have will set certain conditions that I think were outlined in that report. I mentioned the I4R platform. There is also the SCIP database that has been established by ECHA, which will contain information on substances of very high concern in articles, and that will be a database open to all European and non-European members. So we have the opportunity, that information will exist on a database and consumers will have access to that information if they want. Like I say, labelling sounds great, but in reality, I think there's little evidence to suggest it actually works.
Okay. Any other contributions?
Sorry, just to support what Kevin said, and perhaps I should be clearer in my answer. Yes, it needs to be a database that's open to recyclers. It's not a consumer label for the product.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you, Matthew. And our last set of questions on design are from John McNally. Can you unmute, John?
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my questions fairly brief. First question is basically to Kevin and then Andrew. This committee, as we develop recommendations for the government to consider, if you think it would be better through regulations or economic incentives, a mix of both would be the best way to ensure that products are designed to minimise their footprint, easier recycling, repair, manufacture. So basically, as producers, do you think eco-design should be mandated primarily through regulations or encouraged with economic incentives under an extended producer responsibility scheme? Kevin, first, please.
Okay, I'm not sure I quite understand the question, but let me give it a go. I think eco-design provides the right platform to influence product design. And I think we can see that the European eco-design requirements is setting design standards for the rest of the globe. I am a little bit concerned if we look at extended producer responsibility as the mechanism to try to influence product design, because I simply think it won't work. We have the potential for a modulated fee, or the introduction of a modulated fee coming soon with the WEEE regulations. I think that will play some role in separating good design from bad design, but I don't think it will ultimately shape the design of products. I think that is still best achieved through the eco-design requirements, which has done a lot on energy efficiency and is also now looking at non-energy requirements.
Thank you. Andrew, could you comment, please?
Yeah, I'd agree with Kevin. I think eco-design within the European regulatory framework, really, given we're all global manufacturers and European manufacturers, is really important. I think using EPR to drive eco-design, particularly given how recycling currently works in the UK, is going to present a challenge. And I think right at the very fundamental, or the base of this is what is it that we are looking to achieve? Is it to achieve product that lasts longer? Is it to produce product that lasts longer if it's repaired? Is it to produce more energy efficient products, to reduce energy consumption? And it's probably a combination of all three, but I don't think we're necessarily clear on how those three should combine at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's obviously a lot of complex issues to be thought about from our committee and how we produced this report to the government. If I could move on to Eva now for Fairphone, and you might like to know, Eva, that the person credited with developing the flat screen and the phones that we now use was who stabilised liquid crystal displays, was born and bred in my hometown of Denny. But Eva, how would you like to see an EPR designed to encourage more sustainable design and reduce e-waste in a perfect world?
Yeah, to start off with, I really agree with the former two statements. So for me, and actually for Fairphone, the Eco Design Directive, and also the fact that it's now broadening its scope indeed a bit more, always also towards material efficiency and spare parts availability. It's something that we really support. And talking about indeed the EPR, we think the current system is indeed a bit too easy to circumvent, and it scratches the surface, but it's not at the core of the issue actually, and the issue is more wider than just paying a fee. But we do think that it needs a unified approach, and we also think it needs some sort of level playing field, some sort of minimum requirements, which actually also are already in place. For Fairphone, actually, eco design is as I mentioned before, at the core of what we do. We try to lead by example, and again, it's about a modular design. What I actually would like to add so I'm a bit struggling with time, and what I still would like to add, maybe the best thing now to add is that for smartphones, the issue is collection. And I really think that for refrigerators, the issue is something completely different. So I think we really need a unique approach or some sort of, actually unique approach per category. It's tough to combine all those two in one set of regulations. But we do think that the level playing field, so setting up one unified set of minimum requirements that would increase the availability of spare parts and the awareness of eco-design already at the beginning of the design of the product. And we would actually encourage more sustainable design, because we think that is the best way to already in the design process make those decisions to in the end reduce the e-waste.
Okay, thank you very much. My last question is basically about to Kevin and to Andrew about you'll be aware that other European countries are introducing separate EPR schemes. So under the EU circular economy proposals, how effective, and you've probably touched on this just a wee bit earlier, how effective are the economic incentive or the regulations like to be if they're not harmonised across the whole of Europe? Kevin, would you like? Oh, it was for Kevin, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, John, I apologise. I don't quite understand the question.
It was following on from your earlier answer there. There's other European countries will be introducing separate EPR schemes under the EU circular economy proposal. So how effective are these economic incentives or regulations likely to be if they're not in harmony with across Europe?
I've got to say, I don't know an awful lot about what new EPR regimes are being introduced in other European countries. I do know that in the UK there has been some discussion around, for example, looking at furniture or mattresses as extending it to other products. I would say, a lot of the debate around the circular economy is moving away from recycling, but I would say, really importantly, that all products become. I'm still on. Can you hear me?
You've come back in again. Yeah.
Sorry, I think there's a problem with the line. I apologise, but I wanted to say that I still think that we talk about the circular economy, and we kind of push recycling aside now. It's not seen as a very attractive conversation topic, but ultimately all products become waste at some stage. And we are talking about the circular economy, but actually what we haven't addressed since the WEEE regulations came into force is an effective WEEE system in the UK. Producers are still complaining about the system that they have. I would say other actors are probably complaining about the system that we have, but maybe for other reasons. But for plastic and for batteries, there are problems with the systems. So EPR is an effective measure. I think actually I've talked an awful lot about harmonisation with Europe, and actually EPR gives us an opportunity to do something a little bit differently when we come out of Europe.
Thank you for that.
And just one big thing I wanted to say was around targets. We can actually set new targets, and those targets can be a little bit more specific. And as you pointed out, maybe it's a bit more targeted that drives the behaviour that we are seeking to achieve, because the current targets we have are a rather crude mechanism.
Okay, thank you. Are we okay for time, Chair?
I think we're going to ask Andrew to respond, and then we need to move on, I think.
Thank you. That's fine.
I'll try and keep this very brief, and I very much agree with what Kevin said. I think from a European perspective, what's really important is eco-design and commonality there. In terms of EPR, I think the UK has an opportunity to be much more creative there. And I think target setting is something that could very definitely be addressed, and perhaps we could move away from, a system that's based on tonnage placed on the market, which probably bears very little resemblance to products coming off the market, and look for something that's a lot more creative and a lot, a lot nearer what we're seeing coming off the market than we currently have.
Thanks. Thank you both. Thank you, all three of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and thank you to our panelists, Andrew Mullen, Eva Hooyens, and Kevin Considine from the first panel. We're going to move straight into our second panel. It's a good segue from what Andrew was saying about the volume of production, because we're now talking to a group of well-known retailers, and welcome in particular to Robert Tequil from Amazon in the US, to Astrid Wynne from TechBuyer, and Matthew Manning from Dixons Carphone. Could you just introduce yourselves by saying what your responsibilities are at those organisations? Just say your name, where you're from, and what you do. Can we start with Astrid?
My name's Astrid Wynne. I'm the sustainability lead at TechBuyer, which means that I look at our core business. I get involved in research projects to figure out how we can make what we do more mainstream, and how we can improve circularity, particularly within the data center industry, particularly for IT hardware.
Thank you. Yeah. And Robert.
Hi, I'm Robert Turkile with Amazon. I'm the Worldwide Director of Environmental Assurance and Protection. My teams mainly look after environmental compliance and some resource conservation and support our sustainability goals globally.
Thank you. And Matthew.
Yes, I'm Matthew Manning from Dixons Carphone, which brands in the UK are Carphone Warehouse and Currys PC World. I'm the Compliance and Operations Recycling Manager, and I look after all waste streams that we generate as a business across UK and Ireland in stores, in our supply chain, and also from our customers as well, and particularly around waste electricals.
Thank you. Well, both Dixons and Amazon are well-known household retailers in this country now, but TechBuyer is not. So I'm going to start with you, Astrid, if I may. Could you tell us a little bit about your business model? Because I understand it's built primarily on the whole concept of reuse and refurbishment of electrical equipment.
Yes, so we buy, refurbish and sell data center ICT, or IT hardware, so servers, storage and networking. We started branching out into PCs and laptops, but that's our core business. How that works is that we buy redundant IT hardware from a variety of sources, and I can give you details on the supply chain later. We strip it down to core component parts. We test everything on the way in. We data sanitize all data bearing devices. We store, and then we ship to new customers either as spares and upgrades for their existing machinery, or as fully configured machines for new users. So we rebuild the machines. So about 10% of what we do is classed as remanufacturing. Then overall, I'd say refurbishment is about 80% of our business, and we also stock a small quantity of new parts as well for hybrid solutions and third-party alternatives for component parts. We're quite economically successful, which I suppose is quite surprising for a company with our background. We were ranked 102 in the Sunday Times Fast Track 200 last year. We just won a Queen's Award for Enterprise in international trade, not for sustainability, but for international trade.
And what proportion of the product that you take in are you unable to sell?
Minimal. Minimal. I mean, server storage and networking are quite high wearing machines. And so when we have equipment that comes into our warehouse, it's often a lot of the incoming product has been not used because it's been in a backup or test environment. So you're basically looking at cold pulled devices, which are effectively new, they're just not out of the box. Some of our equipment is bulk buy, so organizations that have overbought IT equipment and are looking for a market for that. And I don't know our recycling statistics. I can get them, but I do know that they are very low.
You're not taking in product from consumers,
no.
Therefore, so it's not used in a more conventional consumer sense.
Yes, I'd say that's true.
Okay.
I mean, we're starting to do that more with the PC and laptop offer, but it tends to be enterprise.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'm going to keep going quite a pace because I'm conscious the first panel we took a bit long. So I'm just turning, Matthew, to you and Dixons. Now, Dixons obviously is one of the largest electronic retailers in the country. You are dealing directly with consumers significantly. What are you doing to address this issue, which was raised by Andrew Mullen at the end of the last panel about the tons of electronic waste which is sold each year, but only a very small proportion of which is recycled? I think the BBC had a report today on the Material Focus research, which said that there's approximately 1.5 million tons coming into the market and about 500,000 tons being thrown away.
Yeah, so obviously when the regulations came out, as a retailer, we had the option to join the DTS or set up our own take-back system. And UK was actually the only member state that allowed that derogation. So we went down the set up our own take-back system. Why did we do that? I suppose at the time it's made us unique in terms of a service to our customers, but also to the public, because the route we went down is we allow anyone to come back, even if they didn't buy any product from us, to turn up with any waste electrical and we'll take it back in store. We're also a producer as well. So what we take back in helps offset our obligations there. So it's also saving us money. And also because the units we get back are typically better condition that you might find if you took the WEEE to a household waste recycling centre, where it's typically thrown into a skip and not very well handled. It provides much better equipment for the reuse sector. We completely agree with your point there that there's still some scarily high facts of numbers of units that are not being recycled. I think it was only just today the UNOMIA report came out that over about 150,000 tonnes of WEEE is going in the residual waste stream. which is actually 25% of WEEE that's going down official AATF routes. So what we've done to kind of make it easy for our customers, as on top of increasing our volumes that we're taking back, is all our own brand products, we put a leaflet in there that says, thanks for buying a new product. It's likely that you're replacing an old one. And typically, anywhere between 50 and 80% of the time, someone is buying a product because they're replacing an old one, which is either broken or faulty. Through Christmas and our Black Friday period last year, all our online sales, again, we put a leaflet in those dispatches. So when the customer got it, it reminded them that they could take any product back to one of our stores across the UK for free recycling. We've always also, as well, when we deliver big items, so cookers, washing machines, things like that, we take away the old one. And at the end of 2018, we started a new service, which was the first in the UK, to also offer to collect small products at the same time we were delivering big products. Because typically small ones are those items that are not recycled correctly because they're small. Consumers can easily put them in their bin, and hence why we're seeing the big volumes come through residual waste. And in its first whole year of operation last year, our volumes of small electricals we collected was up 215%. So it's had a real positive effect just to make it convenient for consumers. And even through some of our own research, even though we've been doing take back in our stores since 2007, when we did a survey 2 years ago, only 45% of our customers knew that we did take back. But of the 55 that didn't know, had they known, 85% would have used it. So it's really important. The whole area around communications is really key to make people recycle.
Thank you. Robert, Amazon is obviously best known for delivery of product to the home. Do you have any take back schemes for electrical product?
We do have take back schemes. We participate in the UK and EU EPR markets. And we have Amazon Recycling, which is an opportunity for our customers to recycle their electronic products. We provide that recycling through the DTS and the EPR take back schemes. And in fact, over the past 10 years, we've recovered about 10,000 tons of WEEE electronics that have been disposed of.
And is that mostly in the United States, or are you talking about
that's
the UK?
The UK and the EU, and I'll be providing mainly UK and EU data today, but I apologize. I'll be clear with that, Mr. Chair.
That will be helpful. I mean, it seems to me like you have an enormous opportunity or challenge, depending on how you look at it, in turning the juggernaut that Amazon now is, in that its reputation until very recently has been one of the worst performers in terms of transparency of what it's doing, not only in relation to the environment, but in other areas like taxation, which we won't go into here. But in 2017, I think Greenpeace described it as one of the least transparent companies in the world in terms of your environmental performance. You've come to the company relatively recently. Perhaps you could tell us some of the things that you're doing to improve on that performance.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our sustainability journey. And just to be clear, we recognize at Amazon that sustainability is indeed a journey. And we've been working hard behind the scenes to bring our scale to be able to bring lasting impact. This is why we recently announced and co-funded the Climate Pledge. As you know, the Climate Pledge is our commitment to meet the Paris Climate Agreements 10 years early. With that announcement, we have also launched a Climate Pledge Fund. We have the right now Climate Pledge Fund of $100 million, where we're investing in reforestation, protection of wetlands and peatlands. With that announcement, we also committed to be 100% renewable energy by 2030. Just recently, we increased this and are able to bring that commitment 5 years early, so we'll be at 100% renewable energy by 2025. In addition, we just recently brought a $2 billion climate fund that is investing in innovative companies that are looking to have a positive impact in the climate space. In terms of recycling and products as well, of course, we participate in the EPR schemes, which my teams lead and run globally. We also have voluntary take back and recycling programs with Amazon Second Chance, our Amazon warehouse deals, refurbishment. We also participate and provide information to our sellers and vendors, and that information is readily available on our website.
Well, the pledge you've just referred to is obviously very welcome news, but you've got your work cut out, because in the first year in which you reported your emissions, which was for 2019, you reported that they were 15% up on 2018. And in the current year, given the increase in home delivery, which has been happening through COVID in the UK and all around the world, one has to imagine it's going to go up before it starts coming down. What steps are you taking to get it down for next year?
So, Mr. Chair, I think that's a great question because it gives an opportunity to talk about greenhouse gas accounting. So, as you know, with greenhouse gas accounting, and as you found within our sustainability report, we actually index, and the indexing is very important because we index to a per dollar of gross merchandise sales. And our 2018 versus 2019 numbers, we actually have a 5% decrease as we index across that. So while our growth and our deliveries may be going up, indexed against our gross merchandise sales per dollar is actually going down. It follows the greenhouse gas protocol and other globally and scientifically based tracking mechanisms where we are truly reducing our climate change impact. Just to be clear, though, this is a journey. We know we still have further to go and other opportunities. This is why we had, on the back of the $100 million pledge, we've put the $2 billion fund out there. This is why we're accelerating our commitment to 100% renewable energy. It's also why we continue to find ways to innovate and to bring new ideas to the market for our customers.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Caroline Lucas. Can you unmute, Caroline?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our panelists. I was going to come to Robert as well, first of all, if that's all right. And I wanted to ask you, how do you ensure that overseas producers using your platforms are part of producer compliance schemes for e-waste?
Ms. Lucas, that's a great question. We take our EPR compliance very seriously. I can tell you that's something that my teams have been working on globally, certainly before I was here, but we've been ramping that up and investing in that space. One of the challenges in European jurisdictions that we face right now are a myriad of various different regulations and requirements for registration. It's quite burdensome to ensure that registration and fee payments are made. And this is why we are bringing new ideas to the market to help try and normalize this and make it easier for compliance for overseas sellers, for our sellers and vendors, and for anyone else who wants to participate in our simplified compliance method. We're advocating for this system because it makes it easier for sellers by removing the administrative burden, makes it easier for enforcement authorities where they have one single point of contact to know that all fees and reporting has been made. And it makes it easier for the compliance schemes as well that we participate with. In fact, this is a new concept that we're bringing forward. We've signed an agreement with the Italian Ministry of Environment to pilot this idea. And we've had some great discussions over the past 2 years with DEFRA and engaging with them and other stakeholder groups to bring this idea to the UK.
I mean, it's good to hear that there's some creativity in terms of compliance going forward, but I just wonder, in the meantime, while you're still subject to existing legislation, I wondered what your response would be to some research which suggested, when it was looking at LED light bulbs, for example, that of 120 listings, the first 120 listings on Amazon, 91 of those, in other words, 76%, were non-compliant free riders, which would have made no contribution at all to the UK recycling costs. So right now, that's a real problem, isn't it?
Well, one of the things that Amazon is set up for is we have 3 basic business models. Amazon Retail, which we are the producer and the seller of those products. Our Fulfillment by Amazon, so FBA, where we provide a service to sellers and retailers. and then our Merchant Fulfillment Network, or MFN. Products that are within the FBA or the MFN on the online marketplace are the responsibility of those sellers and producers under the current EPR mechanisms that are in place. This is why we're offering this opportunity with the simplified compliance method to help bridge that regulatory gap that's in place. In addition to your question around the 120 sellers, one of the challenges that we have, since we're not a regulatory enforcement body, is actually knowing if somebody is registered or not. Some of the items that you'll find on our website, they may have been purchased by a seller and the fee was already paid by who they purchased it from, and they're simply putting it into the market. The fee was already paid. Some of them may be registered. You find a different name on the website versus the registration that's already in place with EPR schemes. And when we have had non-compliant sellers flagged to us, we take that very seriously. And we do perform our own research and investigation, notifying the sellers.
Could you do that proactively? Could you not yourselves have more due diligence and make sure yourself before you put those on your sites or allow those on your sites?
Yes, and we actually have many programs where we're proactively communicating with our sellers and vendors. We provide regulatory guidance in 6 different languages throughout Europe. We provide that guidance free of charge. We are also actively working with our sellers and vendors across the EPR mechanism so they understand what their requirements are. And then we, of course, are working with the various different schemes throughout Europe and the UK to ensure that that communication is brought outside of Amazon as well.
Because there is clearly, in spite of all of that, a serious problem with free riding. And one part is whether or not the compliance fees have been paid. Another part is whether or not someone from overseas can say that they are a small producer, whereas in fact they are producing tons of wheat and so forth. And so I wonder, in terms of being able to tighten that up, whether you would support proposals for online marketplaces to be classed as the producer of the products sold on the market.
So we do welcome the introduction of new regulatory requirements. However, I would be cautious about placing the burden onto the online marketplace. Rather, with the simplified compliance model, it allows us to be the intermediary and to pay the fees on behalf of the distant sellers, to also ensure that everything that's sold on the Amazon website is covered by our reporting. We follow the standards for auditing, and our books are wide open in the regulatory and scheme audit process. And actually, this is a methodology, as I mentioned, we're already piloting in Italy. We're in discussions with DEFRA. We've been talking with other EU environmental agencies and ministries because we recognize that distance selling can be challenging. But a lot of that challenge is really based in the current regulations and the significant burden that those distant sellers find, especially with SMEs. If we step back into the UK or in Europe with SMEs, the burden that they see with the regulatory reporting can be actually restrictive to their ability to enter the market.
I'm sure there might be some burden for them, but there's also an awful lot of free riding going on by companies who know exactly what they're doing and are making absolutely no effort to comply. I mean, to the contrary, they are trying not to comply because it's cheaper for them to do that. And I guess maybe I could just put a question on that same question to Matthew Manning about whether you would support, Matthew, proposals for online marketplaces to be classed as the producer of the products sold on their platforms.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly a recognised issue within the UK, and it's commonly raised at various workshops on WEEE regulations. And obviously we're in a global marketplace, so we shouldn't be closing borders to people, but it shouldn't be done in a way that's circumventing national legislation and obviously those companies gaining an unfair competitive advantage. And it's not just WEEE that potentially they're not financing, is packaging, batteries and various chemical and product safety legislation that potentially they're not hitting those standards as well. But no, certainly in terms of a fairer model, and it sounds like the one that Ammon's put in place where they pay those fees and then charge, assuming that back to those distant sellers would be a quick way to do it, because certainly currently there's probably thousands of distance sellers all around the globe, and it's certainly, just if you're looking at the UK, it would be very difficult to police those. So yeah, a simplified way to manage that and recover those costs that I suppose are missing currently from the system would be welcome.
So you would prefer that as a solution rather than what's been suggested by a number of organisations who monitor compliance, which is this idea of the platforms themselves becoming classed as producers?
But either that option would work, but I suppose the one where a marketplace would pick up the fees, so they would report those volumes from those distant sellers, and that platform then recharges that back to those producers. Ultimately, you get the end result. We're getting the money into the system, either from the platform paying it and not recovering it, or the platform paying it and then recovering those costs back from those distant sellers.
And then my last question, just back to Robert, was about concerns around the safety of electronic products and parts being sold through online marketplaces. I wonder, particularly again, since that's something that's likely to have increased through the COVID period, what are you doing about the safety in particular?
So we take our product safety very seriously. We perform hundreds of millions of analysis of our product pages on a daily basis, as well as then constantly scanning for products that are unsafe due to recall or even for customer input. We're looking at hundreds of millions of customer analysis and their feedback on the products that we sell on a daily basis. The AIs and the machine learning tools that we have in place to look for that allow us to very quickly and immediately take down products that we deem to be unsafe. As you mentioned, for the COVID-19, that is definitely an important issue for Amazon, and something that we know we need to continue to innovate in. This is why we have actively removed over 500,000 products because of concerns or issues that were raised about them. In the UK, this is an active process that's ongoing. We take it extremely seriously. In fact, we give any associate, anybody within Amazon has the ability to pull what we call an and-on cord. If they see something wrong with the product, if they have an adverse customer input, so our customer associates, when they're receiving calls, are able to immediately take a product down, even if it's an unfounded or unconfirmed safety issue, just so we can ensure the safety of our customers. And then we'll put that product back up if it's deemed safe. But we take that very seriously.
I mean, it's good to hear you take it very seriously, but we know it's a massive, massive problem. And I wonder what you think about the role of legislation and regulation in this area, because at the end of the day, someone needs to be held accountable for the putting of those products on the market. And there's a big argument to say that if we can't track down the original person, then you are the ones who are bringing it to market.
Well, as I mentioned, with the different business models that we have with the retail, the FBA, and the MFN, under FBA and MFN, especially in the current regulation structure, they are the ones, the sellers and the producers. Even within those models, we still apply our restricted product rules. We still do the same scraping and data analysis of the hundreds of millions of data points on a daily basis across all of our offerings, whether it's within retail or FBA and MFN, even if we're not the producer of record, because we take that seriously.
But if you specifically said there's one of those three areas where you don't feel that you're accountable, and I wonder why not.
So I'm sorry, Ms. Lucas, if that came across as me saying we're not accountable, that was not my intent. We're absolutely accountable to the safety for our customers, and we take that very. Our customers, as you know, Amazon's customer obsessed, and so we do monitor all of our products across the board. I was trying to address your comment on the regulatory requirement and who's accountable and ultimately responsible under the current regulatory framework. And because of the sellers and producers under the FBA and MFN models actually meeting the requirements as being the sellers and producers, they're ultimately responsible.
I guess I was just trying to tease out whether or not you would be in favor of extending that kind of regulation so that the marketplace, Amazon in this case, would be the accountable body in all cases. So not what the current legislation says, but whether or not, for example, we need changes to the online harms bill that's currently going through Parliament to make that clear right across the board.
Yeah, I would say that in general, regulations that require a single entity be responsible for a vast array and wide range of products would be extremely complicated and very challenging to put in place. We're always happy to engage in constructive discussions with various different stakeholders and certainly within the UK on ideas and ways to bring about the changes that you think are necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And now for some questions on collection, I think to Jerome Mayhew.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to ask my first question of Mr. Manning. First of all, I'd like to say how impressed I am by Dixon's Carphone on your take-back procedures that you've already got there. And we know it's an absolute problem here. From a previous session that we've held on this topic, we know that not only is a fair chunk of electronic waste going into landfill, but there's a huge amount that isn't going anywhere except into the attic or into drawers. And I'm afraid I'm as guilty as charged as anyone else, because I nipped off halfway through this talk to just look in a drawer to see what I could find in my house. And I came up with, in under a minute, I don't know if you can see those, there's half a dozen dead phones and devices. So this is something which really needs to be fixed. On this, you've got we've talked a lot about the producer responsibility. We know that retailers have a piece of the pie in the sales process, and so have a corroborating responsibility to fund the collection of e-waste. How important do you think is the retailer taking back the collection of electronic waste? Where does that fit in the sort of the level of importance?
Firstly, thank you for the praise of our take back service. We're very proud of it ourselves. Going on to your question, I think retailers play a really vital role, because ultimately they're the last port of call to the end user, because they're the ones selling the product. And personally, for us, I think it's vital, and I'm quite happy that the change is coming in next year, from the start of next year, that is making mandatory for large retailers to offer take back. Because certainly within the UK, we have one of the lowest density of household waste recycling centres in Europe, which means actually there's not a huge amount of place for people to go. And like you found, and I myself, even though I work in the sector and do recycling, I know I've got electricals tucked away somewhere that are ready to go to be recycled. So obviously retailers are often in more convenient locations than your household waste recycling centre. They have longer opening hours, better transport links. So certainly for people who haven't got cars, they can easily take their old devices. They probably know, if you ask them, oh, where's your local tip? They might not know. If you say, where's your local retail park? They'll know where that is. And come next year, there's pretty much always a Currys PC World there, but there will then be other retailers there that will take stuff back. And I think as well, what's really important around retailers is the communication side of things. So I touched on earlier, on one of the earlier questions, what we've done to communicate to our consumers when they're buying new products in store, and certainly when we rolled out our collection service from home, in the text message they get when they're getting the delivery, it reminds them, oh, if you've got any small stuff, have that ready and we'll take it back. And certainly what we found a couple of years ago, we did a collection trial focusing on with high critical raw materials. So it's typically like laptops, phones, and IT, with a company called Axiom. And part of their research, they asked, it was ourselves, another retailer, and a charity. And out of that research, they found that retailers were more trusted for consumers to hand over those data-bearing devices rather than potentially take them to a tip, because essentially it's quite basically free-for-all. Hence why you probably find a lot of things like phones and laptops hoarded away, because there are these data concerns. So retailers, and having that network opened up, not just ourselves, but other people coming on board, you've suddenly opened up thousands of sites where people hopefully now will dig out those old phones and laptops and take them back in for recycling, to then allow those materials to be recovered. And I think retailers as well, and we certainly have it, we have an active trade-in service. So for laptops, phones, games, where people can bring their old items back and get money for them. And people often do this with their mobile phones already. So I think that's a strong area, and potentially growing as well. We're getting a lot of interest from different types of categories now who are keen to do some form of trade-in, Obviously, because it means that they particularly can push their brand, but also for us, we can collect more WEEE back and recycle it, and I suppose pull it out of the attics and the cupboards and the drawer, and ultimately pull it out of the residual waste stream, because some people are putting the WEEE that route.
Yeah. It's really striking that we've got a long way to go on this, because we recover the least amount in the whole of Europe by the take back route at the moment. Now, you may not be able to answer this, but just on the off chance that you can, I noticed that Ireland, which shares very many similarities with us in terms of customer behaviour, has the highest, with over 56% recovery of our take back. Are you aware of any differences in the system that they are operating that could explain the big difference between our percentage recovery and theirs? And is there something we could learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I do look after all our take back and stuff in Ireland as well, because we have stores out there. So one of the first key differences is you've got mandatory take back in stores. So whereas in the UK, obviously retailers were given the option of do it yourself or join the DTS. And we were very few who went down that route. So that's a big difference. Also, what I find in Ireland is they do a lot of work around marketing and promotion. So the funds that producers are paying into Ireland, a lot of that fund, or a good chunk of that fund, is ring fenced to basically shout about recycling, which we don't see huge amount of that in the UK, because ultimately the way it's set up in the UK is kind of just it's ourselves for the last 10 plus years trying to shout about take back. So it's quite hard to get a consistent take back message when there's only really one retailer doing take back, whereas in Ireland everyone does it, so there's consistency. And if I draw examples, because we operate stores in Norway where it's also that's been mandatory take back. So Norway has 60% less stores than we've got in the UK, but they collect 7 times more small WEEE in their stores than we do, because it's been mandatory since 2007. Whereas for us, we've kind of been on our own little corner trying to shout about it, when no one else is doing it, so there's no consistent messaging. So yeah, the fact that making it mandatory across the board and also driving the message as well will certainly hopefully drive up those volumes in the UK.
Okay, well, let's roll on next year. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Turkile, I was really interested by your earlier answer that you recommend the simplified compliance payment scheme that you're proposing. Why not have a simplified take-back scheme as well for Amazon? Because you've got about 50% of your products, I understand, are where you're being treated as a marketplace as opposed to being directly responsible for the product. Many of those sellers are international. It's impossible for them to offer a take-back service. So shouldn't it really be you who is in the best position to be responsible for take-back?
So, Mr. Mayhew, as you know, in the UK, the DTS, the distributor take-back system, has been quite effective. And we are glad to be part of it and support the DTS and see that as an effective mechanism for increasing take-back across the UK as a whole.
Yeah, I don't buy that, actually. And the reason why is because I just showed you a fistful of my own failure to comply. It's not actually effective. And we just need to look at the difference between the UK, lowest in Europe, and Ireland, very similar economy, very similar culture. I'm part Irish myself. And yet we've got 56% take back in Ireland, where they lead us on many things, and this is one of them. So can you try that answer again, please?
Sure. Ed. Just to be clear, we need to improve take back. That is something that I have personally given direction to my teams, that we are including in the simplified compliance model is something that we're directly looking for is increased take back. We can increase the fee payments. We can make the regulatory and reporting burden easier. But if we don't actually increase the take back, then frankly, none of that really has the impact we're looking for. Because the goal here is to improve the environment, improve the processing, ensure that we're enabling the circular economy. That's the ultimate goal. So we have been improving the communication to customers. We've been trying to launch new programs like Amazon Second Chance, which informs our customers on opportunities for recycling, how they can do repair, upcycling of the products and the packaging that they have. We have a new link on the Amazon UK webpage that's easily found, and you can just click on recycling, and it takes you to a whole host of information where you can drop off your location at drop-off locations, how you can process the WEEE that you have, the items that you were just showing there on the screen, Mr. Mayhew. If you go to our recycling page, you'll find information on where you can take those directly. So we fully agree that we need to bridge that gap. And it's a gap that we have globally, but we're working on very specifically in the UK and the EU.
Well, that sounds great. However, what conceptually do you oppose about Amazon deliveries recovering, taking back products and being responsible for them? Because you have the capacity, you've got the wherewithal, let's not pretend, and you have the in-country infrastructure. So what conceptually, apart from cost and it being a distraction to your core business model, do you have about Amazon being the take-back facility?
So that's actually a very good question. I appreciate you asking it. And it's part of the challenge that we run across globally, not just in the UK and EU. And this kind of gets into my broader teams. So one of the teams that I have is around hazardous waste. As you know, some of the items that show up in the recycle bins or the recycle streams, in particular with WEEE, is designated as a hazardous waste in many countries. If a battery is leaking, if it has been damaged, if there are challenges with the items that are placed in to be recovered, it can be a hazardous condition to transport it. The regulations recognize this and actually restrict the transportation or various different transportation methodologies and who can collect and how they can handle it with appropriate training and requirements. It's extremely detailed because we're trying to protect not only the customers with proper disposal and processing, but then also the drivers and the people who are picking the items up. If you look across our distribution network, as you know, we work with a wide range of distributors and companies that actually deliver the products. They're not always the Amazon vehicles that are going to the houses. They're regular third parties. They don't always return back to an Amazon location. They will typically go to other routes and service other companies. So using that system would be, it would actually reduce the recovery because the frequency in which we would be able to get to the houses with a dedicated Amazon truck, it just doesn't work within our system. Now, with that said, we do have programs where we go and pick up large items. So where we're registered for large WEEE take-back items, refrigerators, washing machines, our customers have the ability, and we'll send out a third-party company to pick those items up specifically to ensure that they are recovered and processed properly. In addition, we provide the Amazon Second Chance and the recycling information that I mentioned to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know we're short of time. I'm going to hand straight back to you.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you. I was just asking Nadia Whittome to join us and to unmute. Caught by my own petard. Nadia.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question firstly for Astrid and then for Matthew. What can the government do to improve the routes that we have for the collection of old technology in a high quality way for reuse? So of course, currently we have different methods of collection for e-waste, namely DCFs, Regulation 50s and Regulation 43s. What do you think can be done to improve those?
On the consumer side?
Both.
Well, I like the idea of mandating retailers to take back e-waste because what that does is it creates a network of multiple locations where e-waste can be collected rather than trying to silo them through these tiny little depots. And the chances are, if you're looking at a retailer, they might know more about what to do with the waste and also find appropriate recyclers for each of the product categories, which is going to be difficult if you're dealing with a waste and resource centre that's got lots and lots of different products coming through its doors. I also think that potentially this could be an opportunity for innovation. We know that recyclers are innovating, looking at things like bioleaching, looking at recovery of critical raw materials from e-waste, and they're looking at monetizing those. And some of the most groundbreaking work is being done here in the UK. Now, what they're lacking is an economic impetus in some cases, but also just quantity of equipment in order to develop their databases and make what they're doing more effective. So we know that one company is working on using microbes to digest ICT equipment. There are 1,000,001 products they could be looking at the moment. They're just looking at PCBs, printed circuit boards, and they're looking at recovery of precious metals in the first instance. If they had critical mass of materials to widen their scope and government support in order to drive that innovation, we could potentially take something that's done on quite a small scale at the moment into much larger production. And so, yeah, if you kind of tie it to innovation and the work that BASE is doing, then potentially you've got a more realistic answer to what you actually do with the waste at the end of it. So therefore it becomes more valuable, so therefore you get more in.
Thanks very much for that, Astrid. Matthew, do you have anything to add?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, what is fairly well recognised is through a retail take-back system, the condition of electricals that are handed over and stay in a much better condition compared to your household waste recycling centres. Typically, if you go there, either stuff is manhandled quite roughly, or if the smaller stuff is thrown into a big skip, where pretty much straight away it's damaged. And also through a retail take-back system, you're reducing the risk of fires as well, which often you can see happening at places because the items aren't crushed. And in our way, we've set up our take-back for items that are brought back in store. They're handed over to a colleague. It's not an unmanned kind of bin. And then they're put on a pallet and then backhauled. And then for the larger items, when we deliver into home, obviously we're removing a product then that's been in situ. So it essentially comes out as it was in the home, gets taken back to one of our depots, and all our depots across the country have a reuse partner. And we work quite heavily with an organisation called the Reuse Network, where they have people on site that see the equipment come back. They look at it and grade it. They'll pick ones based on certain models and makes they know, which either they know they have common faults, they might stay clear of those, or ones they know that are easily repaired. And last year we helped over 10,000 low-income families through that reuse network gain access to refurbished white goods. So that we've done on there. Looking at then the small electricals, we actually did a sample last year of the small electricals that we got back through our stores, just to get a picture of, I suppose, what was reusable out of the stuff that people are handing back. And typically a high proportion of what we get back through our stores is IT. And when with our reuse and recycling partner analysed those loads, we actually found that 73% of the tablets we got back were reusable, 53% of the laptops we got back were reusable, and 30% of the computers we got back are reusable. So through retailer take back, and obviously come next year will be expanded, I think there's a great scope there for companies out there who are within the business of doing reuse to get their hands on much better and high quality weed than typically they would if they potentially were trying to draw stuff out of the kind of your local tip. So I think, yeah, retailers are a very good route for kind of driving that side of the economy, and obviously growing jobs as well, because if there's more stuff coming back, they need to hire more people and train them up as well.
Can I come back on that as well from an enterprise point of view? Because a lot of the collection is based around consumer goods. There is an enterprise version of having things dumped in drawers, primarily because of security concerns. So we know that a lot of enterprises are storing equipment that could be reused and recycled and put onto the secondary market. And it's all based around security concerns, because they believe that the data and the hardware is can't be separated. There are very, very, very good ways of sanitizing data that have been approved by military organizations and top-level security organizations around the world. And if there's more education around that, and there are potentially regulations put into place about enterprises not being able to store usable equipment indefinitely, or at least report on what they've got stored and justify what they've got stored, then you'll see more of that equipment coming back onto the market and coming back into the use phase.
Okay, thank you, Astrid. Chair, would you like to make progress onto the next question?
I think we should. Thanks very much indeed, Nadia. Thanks for your help. Alex Sobel, over to you. You'll need to unmute.
Thank you, Philip. So one of the issues that we have are either real or perceived barriers that prevent the reuse and resale of equipment like computers, tablets, etc. And one of the issues is around the data that is contained with them and the removal and the protection of that data. Do you, either maybe Matthew or Astrid, are these real or perceived issues, and what effect do they have for the presentation and the reuse and resale of IT equipment?
I'd say, sorry, if you'd like to continue, Matthew.
No, you can go, Astrid, it's fine.
I'd say that they're perceived risks rather than real risks. If you've got organisations like the US Department of Defence saying that you can sanitize data and recover hardware, then you'd say that their security standards are pretty reliable. There's also the fact that you can drill holes in hard disk drives and still recover data from them. So there's a misconception there as well. Data is an incredibly valuable asset, and it needs to be protected and it needs to be sanitized. But there's a lack of awareness about how easy that is to do, or how doable that is with the correct software and also the correct collection processes in place. So a secure chain of custody from the client's facility to your facility, for example, and have that asset tracked and logged, and have it all done by members of staff who have been security vetted themselves. There are accepted practices that have been adopted by some fairly high-level organisations that we're starting to see come through in the public sector tenders in some ways. But if there was more scope for that, or if that was supported by legislation in terms of, if companies are not doing this, can they justify why they're not? And there will be some cases in which companies can justify that, but if you ask the question, then it becomes they have to have a reason for not doing it, rather than take a perceived risk in doing it and worry about the consequences.
Okay. In the interest of time, maybe I'll move on. Maybe, Astrid, I'll just ask you one more question, trying to wrap up the points that we've got remaining before the last question. So, the used IT could provide a good option for public sector procurement. What are the sort of barriers for that to happen, and maybe more generally for people to use refurbished products? And what more can be done to adequately make people feel secure about the use of these refurbished products? And also, just as an extension of that, is there an issue with certain companies maintaining monopoly over the repairs and refurbishment of these products, so which is a barrier to secondary market?
Okay, so there's quite a lot there, and I'll try and do it quickly. In terms of procurement, yes, there is an issue. We are getting feedback from the people that carry out our tenders and carry out our framework applications that organisations are saying they are not allowed to give a refurbished or recycled option. Now, that is mostly about a perceived risk. Now, we have proved with the University of East London that refurbished equipment is just as reliable as new equipment, and we've also proved that the previous generation of equipment can be upgraded in such a way that it outperforms the latest generation of equipment, and we've proved that there's no energy loss as part of that. So we've put together quite a lot of data around that, but we're still getting blocked by the procurement practices of nobody ever got fired for using IBM, that kind of mentality. Again, if you did the same thing and you flipped it, and as legislators you said, okay, that's fine, you don't have to make provision for refurbished and recycled equipment in your procurement procedures. But if you don't do that, can you justify why not? There will be some cases, there will be some environments in which you need the latest, greatest set of IT equipment, but not always. And if there's no reason in terms of performance or in terms of risk, and we issue a 3-year warranty as standard, then justify why you are saying no outright without even considering it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that in terms of standardization, there's very little that exactly covers refurbishment of ICT necessarily. For our company, we know definitely not. So what we're looking at is collecting together certifications for quality, environmental responsibility, security, and building those into this suite of certifications that says, actually, we do things as well as we can do. For us, we would welcome standards that expand upon that and are recommended practice in procurement policies for the public sector, because if there are viable standards that stand up to scrutiny and the public sector are using it, then that brings it into the mainstream. The third thing that we think about is extended producer responsibility, because that incentivizes manufacturers to perhaps extend their warranties, make the equipment last longer, potentially even use refurbished parts as part of their upgrades, which again brings that conversation into the mainstream, and then it jumps over that perceived risk, which we're confident isn't there, and we're confident that, you know, we can prove that. We would say that, wouldn't we? But if the onus is put on people to prove why that's not so, then you're getting somewhere. And there are other things that I can say, but I won't.
Thank you, thank you. I'll move. I think it's time to move on. Thank you. I'll hand back to Philip now.
Thank you, Alex. And so the final set of questions from Claudia Webb.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Philip. And I just want to really ask questions around the extended producer responsibility area. And of course, I come from a perspective where I do believe that producers should bear the full responsibility of the environmental and financial impact of the products that they produce. And I think that that's important. So I want to ask my first question to Matthew, if I can. So Matthew, I want to know, what's your view on how an extended producer responsibility system could work in the UK, and really how you believe the current proposals will impact on retailers such as yourself?
Yeah, so quickly on the retailer side of things and the changes that are proposed there. Obviously, we're already set up for those changes because in terms of the take back side of things, we've been doing it. Jumping onto the EPR bit, I think the conversation around EPR on WEEE is certainly very different to the one that's happening around packaging. They're both starting in very different places in terms of regulations, and it's obviously quite well reported that I suppose the fees that packaging producers are paying is around 10% of the true cost for treatment within the UK. And obviously one of the changes they're looking to bring in is that the conversation around full net recovery, so significantly more cost put on those packaging producers and reduce the burden on councils. Moving that onto WEEE, it's, I mean, the EPR principle on that is slightly different, and so it does not exceed the cost that is necessary to provide waste management. And I think generally, if you look at the costs producers are paying under WEEE, they're pretty reflective. They're picking up pretty much all of the costs there. The question comes then is, how do we, in terms of what we're collecting in the UK, kind of take it up, because the volumes we're collecting are pretty stagnant, and against the last 2 years of targets, we haven't hit them, and thus using the compliance fee. So the question is things like curbside collection, if they're mandatory for councils, who's going to finance the retrofitting of all the vehicles and communication campaigns as well. So I think there's scope there that within an EPR model, producers should be financing that, because ultimately they're going to benefit from collecting more WEEE at curbside, because then they'll be less reliant on the compliance fee. And on the compliance fee side, obviously this year, through the material change and the Recycle Electronics campaign, obviously that's being funded through the money raised through the compliance fee. So obviously we get to an ideal situation where the UK is hitting its targets and there is no compliance fee. The question is, where's that money going to come from to continually fund those campaigns to tell the consumer what to do? So again, there's a valid question saying that there needs to be a continual pot of money coming from producers to fund that communication. So it's not so good hitting a target and suddenly it drops back down again. We need to keep that consistent messaging so consumers continue to know what to do with their waste electricals, be it house or waste recycling centre, through an improved retailer take-back system and through curbside as well. Because ultimately, it's down to convenience. People want the easiest way to recycle packaging. You've always got your bin at the front, so you can put it in there. But for very few councils do curbside, and you have to kind of go out your way to do it unless it's getting collected from your doorstep.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. And I know that we're short of time, so I'll just move on, if I might, to Astrid, if I might ask you this particular question. And I just really want to know how you would like to see extended producer responsibility system designed to ensure that more IT equipment incorporates actually refurbished equipment.
It's a tough one because as members of the secondary market, we're kind of trying to figure out how that would work. If you're looking at the producer of the equipment, their business model tends to be focused around new. So if you're looking at extended producer responsibility, you're potentially giving them control over the secondary use of their products, which, has a potential risk of making the market less competitive. Having said, in broad terms, it would be beneficial because it would encourage equipment manufacturers to think about the value in their equipment and to retain that value for as long as possible. And that has benefits in terms of bringing reuse and recycling into the mainstream. So it's seen as a mainstream product offer, which means that more people are likely to take it up. Then there's the question of, if you've got a new manufacturer also promoting secondary use, how far is that viably going to work? So I think there needs to be consideration in the legislation around that issue and more investigation done on how that would potentially work with the manufacturers. Does that make sense?
Okay.
May I add something to that?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just, I think potentially as well, what you'll start to see is certain brands and manufacturers going down the individual producer responsibility route, either if they've got their own, to offset their own obligations, but also as well if they're looking to build in and set targets around closed loop and recycled content. And an example is Apple doing their trade-in, and they've obviously got their robot called Daisy, where they're looking to get their own iPhones back, break them apart and recover the materials out there. So I think certainly over the next 5-10 years, you'll see a lot more brands kind of actually reach out to the households and to get those products back, either through trade-ins, offers, or even circular business model like leasing. So then they essentially still own the product and they can get it back and either refurbish them or recover the parts out of them to be used in new products again.
There's also, there's a disincentive potentially on cost. So we know that some equipment manufacturers do have their own refurbished options on their equipment. And these are usually facilitated by third-party organisations kind of under contract to the original equipment manufacturer. So you're getting a double pricing there in the market. You're getting the money paid to the equipment manufacturer, and then you're getting the money paid for the repair, which is then passed on to the consumer, which then makes it financially less attractive for a consumer to buy a refurbished product. Whereas if you've got a more free market approach with third parties and service operators in there, then you get a more competitive business model or more competitive offer to market, I think.
Okay. Okay, thank you both for that. Let me just ask a final question to Robert, if I might. So Robert, we know that other European countries will also be introducing separate extended producer responsibility schemes under, of course, the EU's own circular economy proposals. I just wondered, obviously, in terms of Amazon and the range of producers that it has on its platforms, just how will you ensure, how will Amazon ensure the complexity of paying different fees in different countries, that the various producers that you have on your platforms, that they are able to understand and sell on its platform and cope with those different fees?
So, Ms. Webb, I think that this is one of the underlying challenges that we have with the EPR regulations in the UK and Europe, and frankly, globally, is the myriad and patchwork of different ways of going about implementing the regulations. It makes it extremely challenging, and it is very costly, especially for SMEs, for smaller producers, to meet those requirements. And we've seen it as a barrier for entry into various different marketplaces across the EU, and then from the EU into the UK, and it limits selection for customers. That's why we're advocating for the simplified compliance model for online marketplaces, because it would consolidate that reporting, it would simplify the reporting, it would make the enforcement of the reporting and the fee payment much simpler for the schemes and for the regulatory bodies. It would eliminate that complexity while increasing the fees, which then, as I mentioned before, the ultimate goal then is to increase take back and recycling. Because I think you're right on. Finding that methodology of how do you report with the various different 14 categories in France versus the 18 categories in Germany versus the requirements in the UK, it is a large burden. I mean, within my teams alone, we have over 70 people working on that, just in the reporting that we have to do because of that complexity. And so I very much welcome the opportunity, in particular in the UK, as we have been doing in discussions with DEFRA, to bring about that simplified model so that we can overcome some of those burdens and remove those challenges, in particular with SMEs.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I wish we had more time to ask you a few more questions, but we are out of time, I believe, and so I'm going to hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm afraid we have overrun, so I'd like to thank everyone. I'm going to ask just one question of my own more to Matthew. Robert gave us a view about the sort of delivery improvements that Amazon intend to make on their emissions from delivery vehicles. But have Dixons seen a big increase in home delivery through COVID, and what are you doing in that area?
Yeah, so in terms of our delivery model, we deliver on our own fleet large items, and then smaller household electricals are done through the likes of DPD and Royal Mail. But in terms of what we're doing on the carbon front, is we've recently signed up to the British Retail Consortium's Task Force on Climate Action. So ourselves and 19 other retailers are basically setting out a roadmap to be net zero ahead of the government's 2050 target. And we're also, as well, from our own energy management, we achieved our energy reduction targets ahead of our 2020 original targets. So currently we're in the phase of setting science-based targets to cover 1, 2, and 3 scope emissions there to really kind of drive that down. And we're currently exploring as well within our delivery of our own vehicles, alternative fuels as well when we go out and there to reduce the carbon impact further.
So on your net emissions target, you said the BRC are looking to get to the 2050 net zero at that time, or are they going to come and do it earlier?
That task force is looking to achieve it ahead of the 2050.
But you haven't set a date?
Not yet. And ourselves and 19 other retailers are basically crafting that roadmap of how we achieve that within the retail sector.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much indeed. That concludes our panel. I'd like to thank our guests, Matthew Manning, Robert Kyle, and Astrid Wynne. I'd like to thank members of the committee for bearing with us for this slightly lengthened session, and the previous panelists, and Andrew Bax, our committee clerk, for putting together the brief. Order. Thank you all very much, and in particular, Robert, for